Thank you very much indeed. Mrs Lang, I rise to support new clauses 3 and 57 and would commend the speeches made by my honourable friend, the member for Greenwich and Woolwich, and my right honourable friend, the member for Camberwell and Peckham. And the one thing I would say, to add to the forceful case that she put, when we had evidence before the Select Committee from people representing Brits living abroad, one might have expected them to make the argument we've just heard advanced, but actually they said the opposite. They said, yes, Britain should give a unilateral commitment now because they felt it would ease the process of negotiation. Right. Now, I want to... I will give way, of course.
Just on that, I'm really, because I wasn't at that committee, I'm quite interested, Madam Chairman, was evidence taken from the ambassadors from EU countries about their government's positions as part of your inquiry?
No, we have not taken evidence from ambassadors, but we've heard what has been said from that dispatch box. I think from memory, almost all of the member states are up for this, apart from one or two. Now, we don't yet know who the one or two are, and I hope they will change their mind so that we can make progress on this. But I wanted to address the arguments we've heard thus far in relation to new clause 3. Could I just say to the honourable member for Forest of Dean, on his answer to my honourable friend, the member for Lewisham East, no longer in her place, when she said, should we be able to have a vote on certain aspects of the nature of our withdrawal, he said no, because during the course of the referendum campaign, it was made clear by leading participants that this is what would happen if we voted to leave. And therefore, it's gospel, we can't argue with it. Well, I would just say that's a very interesting argument, because on that basis, the NHS will be getting £350 million a week, because that's what was said would be a consequence of a leave vote. But anyway, I leave that on one side. The central argument that the honourable gentleman made at the beginning of his speech was to get up and say, what does this add, new clause 3? And I say to him, genuinely, it adds accountability. That is what new clause 3 is about. And insofar as it's been argued, well, it's unnecessary because we're doing it already. Well, if we're doing it already, then why is there a problem about the government accepting it? Then the argument was made that the government will be required to be forced to reveal all sorts of stuff. All it says is, shall giving an undertaking to lay before each House of Parliament periodic reports. The content of those reports will be for the government to determine. There's nothing in here about forcing the government to reveal its hand. And when it comes to getting in English the documents which the European Commission is giving to the European Parliament in probably English, since, well, we still have MEPs and the other official languages of the European Union, surely there cannot be any argument about that at all. It is entirely sensible. And on the point about confidential documents, and I listened carefully to what he said and the honourable member for Stone, I did raise this with the Secretary of State when I was first elected as the chair of the Select Committee, and he replied to me in a letter and said, and I quote, "Negotiations will be fast-moving and will often cover sensitive material, so we will need to find the right ways of engaging Parliament." And I welcomed that reply. And all this says is the government shall make arrangements for parliamentary scrutiny of confidential documents. The arrangement was for the government to propose. Now, I can't help making the point that it may be the arrangements, given the extent to which Brussels is a very leaky place, and when you're negotiating with 27 other member states, I suspect we'll find out very shortly after the meeting has concluded where the negotiations have got to. The government's arrangements will be to advise us all to buy certain newspapers in which one can read what has been discussed during the course of the afternoon and the evening. Of course I will give way.
I'm most grateful. The main point I was making, and I stand by it, is this: that new clause 3 imposes a legal obligation enforceable by judicial review on the Prime Minister, effectively, not effectively, but actually and legally, to break the confidentiality which is imposed, for example, by these limited documents. And I'm quite sure that although, as I've said, I then subscribe to the degrees of confidentiality sometimes, but that's a personal view. The fact is that it is there and it is a legal obligation.
Well, I would say to the honourable gentleman who has great experience in these matters, we know that the Commission, in respect of trade negotiations, made arrangements with the European Parliament for certain documents to be made available, including in rooms that people could go and read but couldn't take them away. What this clause is saying to the government, find a way of making it work, which is consistent. Of course, it will have to be consistent with any legal obligations that there are, but it doesn't seem to me a very strong argument, nor does the argument, well, it would make it all justiciable. Well, frankly, on that basis, we might as well all go home tonight and never come back, because Parliament legislates. And when Parliament legislates, people can go to the courts and seek to suggest that the way the legislation is being implemented is not correct. So that is not an argument against New Clause Through, it's an argument against Parliament doing its job. And I would gently say to the government, and having listened to the speeches that have been made from that side, I would say to the Minister, who is a reasonable man, I hope we won't hear him get up and repeat the arguments that we've heard in relation to New Clause 3, because, frankly, it's really simple and sensible stuff to help Parliament to do its job. And on the frequency of reporting, as he will know, the Secretary of State, when my right honourable friend and a learned friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, suggested 2 months, the Minister, the Secretary of State, got up and said, well, that might be a rather modest objective. If it's a modest objective, I really don't see how the government can oppose it.